Magic swords are inherently cool, and lost magic swords are inherently even cooler, which is why author George R. R. Martin has littered these blades throughout his story. In the past, I've discussed Dark Sister and Blackfire, the two ancestral swords of House Targaryen, both of which are lost in the main series, and both of which I believe will resurface at some point before that series reaches its conclusion. And today, I want to discuss another sword that is also lost, though seemingly on a different continent than the other two, though it is very important to a family that has arguably been more significant to the current struggles in Westeros, as it is the ancestral sword of House Lannister, the current ruling power in Westeros, and the house of three of our viewpoint characters. Today, I want to discuss the past and potential future of the Lannister sword, Brightroar. Brightroar was a Valyrian steel sword, which is pretty notable. This is a special type of spell-forged metal that cannot be made anymore in the world of Ice and Fire. As the name would imply, it could only be made in Valyria, this magical dragon empire from which the Targaryens descend. While today some smiths can rework Valyrian steel into other forms, it cannot be produced anew, which is why these swords are so valuable. It seems, based on the history that we have from A Storm of Swords and the world of Ice and Fire, that the Lannisters were fairly late to the Valyrian steel party, as it were, as they only purchased this sword, and it is said for the price of a small army, about 100 years before the doom of Valyria, so roughly around 500 years before the main series as it currently begins in A Game of Thrones, but it was lost long before then. Fitting for a House of Lions, the fatal flaw of House Lannister seems to be pride, and this goes far back into the series' past. Specifically, back when the Lannisters were kings, before Aegon the Conqueror came, King Tommen II decided he was going to sail to Valyria to uncover its secrets and valuables sometime after the doom had taken place. He obviously was going to take his beloved great sword Brightroar with him, and he sails off with this golden fleet east to uncover this lost land. The last report we have of this fleet is in Volantis, where they supposedly were welcomed and feasted, and then they sailed off to supposedly Valyria, where they met their doom. Nothing is heard of this fleet after that stop in Volantis, and to this day, Brightroar has not been recovered. That is not for lack of trying, however. Tyrion's favorite uncle, Garyon Lannister, decided he was going to take a quest of his own. He was going to go to Valyria, not to investigate the city, so to speak, but to just find this sword that his ancestors lost hundreds and hundreds of years ago. He sets off around the year 291 AC, which is always a lot closer to the start of the main series than I think. For reference, the main series starts in 297, so just 6 years later. But then he ends up going east and having this little misadventure where Tywin is eventually able to have these men kind of track him through it, going through Essos stop by stop, until he eventually vanishes after going into Volantis. We hear that his crew abandons him when they hear his intention to sail the Smoking Sea, and because of that, he is forced to hire slaves to continue to do this duty. So he and this new crew sail off towards Valyria, but like King Tommen before him, nothing is heard after that point. So when assessing where this sword might resurface in the series, if indeed it does, we need to consider Volantis as the last known point of not only the sword itself, but then the last person who we know was searching for the sword. Obviously, the thought from there is that they went to Valyria, that one or both of those parties was successfully able to make their journey to Valyria, and then whatever creatures and magical or natural phenomenon lurk therein took care of them, as we know things like these fireworms and infected area Targaryen did exist there as well. With that said, there is a way it could have theoretically been retrieved from Valyria by one character who claims to have been there, specifically Euron Greyjoy. In A Feast for Crows, after the Kingsmoot, Euron claims to have sailed the Smoking Sea and plundered Valyria for himself, which I always thought was bullshit until I read the Forsaken chapter, in which he has a suit of Valyrian steel armor, which is insane and more expensive than many castles in Westeros. This does lend some credence to the idea that he did, to some degree, go to Valyria, but he's also still kind of touchy in terms of being questioned on whether he went to Valyria, as this one character, Roderick the Reader, does kind of call bullshit on that, and Euron very much has his temper flare in response to that, and it seems as though there's something up. I've posited in the past, when discussing Euron and whether or not he could be a fraud, that there could be something going on here. There are a number of indications that Euron could have these skin-changing powers, most notably that his crew is mutes. His ship, the Silence, which is the coolest name ever, is entirely staffed by individuals who have had their tongues ripped out by Euron, and crews on ships need to communicate somehow. So maybe Euron is doing so telepathically or warding his crew or something to that effect. My idea, which I've again pitched in the past, is that Euron is warding individuals on his crew or who he brought there just for that purpose to go into Valyria for him, locate magical artifacts, and then pull them out kind of in a deadly game of relay as he's just kind of passing it from thrall to thrall as those thralls eventually fall victim to whatever curses lie in Valyria, so he doesn't have to risk his own skin. That does raise the question, if he did pull a Valyrian steel sword as well as the armor from his trips into Valyria, why isn't it in the Forsaken chapter? I can think of one of two reasons for this. Option A could just be that Aeron didn't notice it. Likely a sword would have still been in its sheath at that point, at the end of that chapter, so Euron might have just not taken it out yet, so he wouldn't have seen that it was Valyrian steel. And additionally, too, Euron is not Victarion. He's not going to be hopping from ship to ship, dealing death with every blow. I think there's a pretty strong chance he might not need to wield a sword in a battle where he's pretty clearly going to be using some sort of weird blood magic stuff. I also want to ask two questions. One, what's your favorite Valyrian steel sword or weapon in the series? And two, are there any other videos in this style you would like to see me do for these missing artifacts or weapons or what have you? Let me know in the comments down below, and while you're down there, leave a like, subscribe, I really appreciate it, and it does help the channel a lot. When I was researching for this video, I also found another really interesting theory on Reddit, which I will link to in the description. Specifically, it pitches the idea that the sword might have never made it to Valyria itself. Instead, it might have stayed at the place where we heard that Garion and this fleet from Tommen were the last time they were in the historical record whatsoever, that being Volantis. Volantis is a very large city, very politically complex, and it will be revisited in the Winds of Winter. We know that because it is continually referenced that Daenerys and Tyrion are going to have to return to right this city and bring it back to what it should be and free all of the many, many slaves that make up its many, many markets. The thought seems to be that in these feasts and welcomings for King Tommen, perhaps he was deceived and the sword was taken and he could have been killed. The only source we have on his fleet fully vanishing is that the Volantines sent a fleet to go look for him a year later and found nothing. So it's a little convenient, and we also know that one political party in Volantis, a little detail that I like and isn't in the Reddit theory, is called the Tigers, and I like the idea that the Tigers could be stealing from the Lion here. So that could be an interesting possibility, and it could be a good way for the sword to come back into the story. Once Daenerys and Tyrion sack Meereen, Tyrion could find it there. My only other thought requires a few asterisks, but it's an idea I can't get out of my head, and it has to do with a Tyrion chapter that exists but that we'll never really get to read. In the process of writing A Dance with Dragons, we know that George R. R. Martin wrote one Tyrion chapter and chose to cut it from the book entirely. Not cut to the Winds of Winter, but it just didn't happen. Specifically, it was this chapter effectively happening after Tyrion falls off of the Shy Maid, this boat he's traveling on. He would have this audience with the Shrouded Lord, this individual who's very high up with the Stone Men, who is supposedly the originator of grayscale as a whole. This takes place in the Sorrows, which is a decent bit north of Valyria and Volantis, but I do have this thought that this seems to be important to some degree. Tyrion seems to have some connection to the Shrouded Lord. He keeps thinking about him, and he often ties him in with images of his father, as he has these nightmares about both individuals. Some people have pitched that Garion Lannister could be the Shrouded Lord, and I think that could be an interesting idea. It could tie up his vanishing, and it would be interesting to see Tyrion kind of finally find his favorite uncle, but now as a monster. But my other thought is, what if the Shrouded Lord had Brightroar or something, or it was there? I don't know why Tyrion probably wouldn't have any position to grab it at that point, but we do know that the Shrouded Lord supposedly gives boons to those who make him laugh, so I imagine most of that chapter would be Tyrion trying to make the Shrouded Lord laugh, and I really wish we'd gotten to read it, but that book is overstuffed enough as it is. Hey, if Martin's not releasing any more sample chapters, maybe he'll release this chapter. That'd be cool. The more I've ended up thinking about it, the more convinced I am that Brightroar will reappear in the series. Because if we're thinking about it, these books really need more Valyrian steel swords. This massive conflict that is coming against the others, there simply isn't enough dragonglass and Valyrian steel to make a realistic fight happen, especially among our main characters. And if we're looking at all of the characters coming west with Daenerys and her group, we have no Valyrian steel there whatsoever, aside from maybe Marwyn's chain, mask, and rod, as he is the Archmaester of Higher Mysteries. Beyond that, I think people in her camp do very much need some weaponry to be able to fight the others, because I do think that Daenerys is going to take this threat seriously. I think that her people are going to help Jon Snow's people to do this defending. So, I don't know, having Tyrion rediscover Brightroar as he is kind of re-embracing his identity as a Lannister, as he's coming back to Westeros, that does seem like a good kind of way to tie things together. Thank you all so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe. I really appreciate it, and it really helps grow the channel. I have many more videos for you on A Song of Ice and Fire, House of the Dragon, Dunk and Egg, Game of Thrones in the near future, and I hope you will join me for all of those. I said everything I needed to say. I have a Patreon, that's what I forgot to say. That's also in the description. Thank you again for watching. Goodbye, everybody.